The rain drummed against the coffee shop window as I stared at my laptop screen, my hands trembling slightly as I scrolled through the email that would change everything. 3 years of work, countless sleepless nights, and dreams bigger than this small town could contain, all reduced to a single line. We regret to inform you that your business proposal has been declined due to prior submission of a similar concept. I'm Sarah, and if you're watching this, you need to hear what happened next, because sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who cut the deepest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The notification sound from my phone cut through my shock like a blade. A text from my brother Marcus, sent just 20 minutes after I'd received that devastating email. "Hey sis, got some exciting news to share with the family tonight. See you at dinner." The casual tone, the exclamation point, the way he signed off with that stupid grinning emoji he always used when he was particularly pleased with himself. Something cold settled in my stomach as I read those words, but I couldn't quite grasp why. I'd been working on my sustainable packaging company, EcoWrap Solutions, since I graduated from business school. The concept was revolutionary yet simple: biodegradable packaging made from agricultural waste that could decompose completely within 60 days, while maintaining the durability of traditional plastics. I'd spent months researching, developing prototypes in my garage, testing different combinations of materials until my fingers were permanently stained with various organic compounds. The breakthrough had come last winter, when I finally created a formula that worked perfectly, strong enough for shipping yet environmentally responsible. The investor meeting had been scheduled for today at 2 o'clock. Henderson Capital, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the state, had initially shown genuine interest after I'd submitted my proposal 3 weeks ago. Margaret Henderson herself had called me, her voice warm with enthusiasm, as she described how my concept aligned perfectly with their environmental sustainability initiatives. "This could be exactly what we're looking for, Sarah," she'd said, and I'd felt my heart soar with possibility. I'd prepared for weeks, every PowerPoint slide was perfect, every financial projection triple-checked, every potential question anticipated with a carefully crafted response. My prototype samples were arranged in an elegant presentation box, each piece demonstrating a different aspect of the material's versatility. I'd even bought a new blazer, navy blue with silver buttons, because I wanted to look professional yet approachable. This was my shot, my one chance to turn years of dreaming into reality. The meeting itself had started well. Margaret Henderson was exactly as I'd imagined, sharp-eyed and direct but not unkind. She'd examined my samples with genuine interest, asking technical questions that showed she understood the innovation behind my work. Her associate, a younger man named David, had taken detailed notes and nodded approvingly at my financial projections. For 45 minutes, I felt like I was flying, every question answered confidently, every demonstration going smoothly. Then Margaret's expression had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. She'd glanced at David, who had pulled out his tablet and scrolled through something I couldn't see. "Sarah," she'd said, her tone suddenly careful, measured, "I have to ask you something, and please understand this isn't personal. Have you shared this concept with anyone else, anyone at all who might have had access to your research or development process?" The question had caught me off guard. Well, my family knows I've been working on a packaging project, but I haven't shared any technical details. "Why do you ask?" Margaret had exchanged another look with David before continuing. "We received another proposal last week with remarkably similar specifications. The applicant claimed to have been developing this technology for over 2 years and provided extensive documentation of the development process. My mouth had gone dry. That's impossible. This is my work, my formula. I can show you my research logs, my development timeline, everything. But even as I'd said it, something had felt wrong, like a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit but you force it anyway. Margaret had been polite but firm. They needed time to investigate the situation, to determine which proposal had legitimate claim to the technology. In the meantime, they couldn't move forward with either application. Now sitting in this coffee shop with rain streaming down the windows and my dreams apparently crumbling, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Who else could possibly have developed the same technology? The chances of 2 people independently creating identical formulas were astronomical. Every compound ratio, every processing temperature, Every biodegradation timeline in my formula had been the result of specific experiments and failures. This wasn't something that could be accidentally replicated. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from LinkedIn. Marcus Thompson has updated his professional experience. Marcus Thompson, my brother who'd been working as a marketing coordinator at various startups for the past few years, jumping from company to company whenever something more exciting came along. Curious despite my distracted state, I clicked on the notification. The update made my blood freeze. Excited to announce my new venture, GreenPack Innovations, developing next-generation biodegradable packaging solutions from agricultural waste. After 2 years of intensive research and development, we're ready to revolutionize the packaging industry with environmentally responsible products that don't compromise on performance. 2 years of research and development, GreenPack Innovations, biodegradable packaging from agricultural waste. Every word was a knife twist, because every word described my work, my innovation, my future. I read the post again, then a third time, hoping I'd misunderstood something, hoping this was some bizarre coincidence. But there was no mistaking it. Marcus was claiming credit for everything I'd created. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I packed my laptop with shaking hands and stumbled outside into the rain, not caring that I'd forgotten my umbrella. The cold drops mixed with hot tears on my cheeks as I tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. My brother, my own flesh and blood, had stolen my life's work and presented it as his own. But how, when, and more importantly, why? I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing through memories, looking for clues I might have missed. Marcus had always been charming, the golden child who could talk his way into or out of anything. Growing up, he'd borrowed my homework, just to check his answers, and somehow ended up turning in identical papers. When I'd confronted him about it, he'd flashed that disarming smile, and claimed it was just a misunderstanding, that great minds think alike. Our parents had laughed it off, calling us their twin brains despite being born 2 years apart. In college he'd dated my roommate Jessica for 6 months, charming her completely before breaking her heart when he found someone more interesting. But before he left, he'd convinced her to let him borrow her senior thesis research for a paper he was writing. Jessica had been devastated twice over when she discovered he'd presented her work as his own in a different class. I'd been furious, but Marcus had explained it away as a miscommunication, a simple mistake that had spiraled out of control. The pattern was there, had always been there, but I'd chosen to see the best in him. Family loyalty, I'd told myself. Brothers sometimes make mistakes, but this wasn't a college paper or borrowed homework. This was my career, my future, my chance to make a real difference in the world. This was the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since graduating, and he'd stolen it like it meant nothing. My apartment felt different when I walked in, tainted somehow by this new knowledge. Everything looked the same, but felt wrong, as if someone had shifted all the furniture just slightly off-center. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop again, determined to understand exactly what had happened and when. The LinkedIn post was just the beginning. If Marcus was claiming 2 years of development, he must have more documentation than a simple social media update. I created a fake LinkedIn profile, something I'd never thought I'd need to do, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Under the name Jennifer Walsh, I requested connection with Marcus and several of his recent contacts, hoping to gather more information about this supposed company he'd started. While waiting for responses, I dove deeper into his social media presence, looking for any mention of GreenPack Innovations or sustainable packaging research. The trail was disturbingly thorough. Facebook posts dating back 8 months, showing him working late in the lab again, with photos of equipment that looked suspiciously similar to the setup I had in my garage. Instagram stories about breakthrough moments and exciting developments that aligned perfectly with the timeline of my own discoveries. Twitter updates discussing the challenges of sustainable packaging, using terminology and insights that I recognized because I'd shared them with him during family dinners, when he'd asked about my work. Each post was a masterpiece of calculated deception. He'd never explicitly claimed to have made specific discoveries, but the implication was clear. Anyone following his social media would believe he'd been working independently on sustainable packaging for months. The posts were crafted to create a narrative, a story of dedicated research and development that would support his claim to the technology. But I knew something Marcus didn't know, something that would prove beyond any doubt that the work was mine. Hidden in my research files, protected by passwords he'd never seen, was documentation that would expose his lies completely. The question was whether I'd have the courage to use it when the time came. My phone rang, interrupting my investigation. Mom's number flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. Family dinner was supposed to be tonight, the dinner where Marcus had exciting news to share. The thought of sitting at that table, pretending everything was normal, while he announced his fraudulent success, made me physically ill. But not answering would raise questions I wasn't ready to deal with yet. "Sarah, honey, you're still coming to dinner tonight, right?" Mom's voice was cheerful, excited. "Marcus says he has something wonderful to tell us, and you know how he gets when he's keeping secrets. He's been bouncing around like a kid all week." The affection in her voice, when she spoke about Marcus, was unmistakable. He'd always been her favorite, though she'd never admit it. The charming one, the social one, the one who brought girlfriends home and made everyone laugh with his stories. "I'll be there, Mom," I managed, though the words felt like glass in my throat. She chatted for a few more minutes about the menu she'd planned, about how proud she was of both her children, about how wonderful it was that we were both doing so well in our careers. Each word of praise felt like another betrayal, knowing what I now knew about Marcus's success. After hanging up, I sat in my silent apartment and tried to figure out what to do next. Confronting Marcus directly seemed like the obvious choice, but I knew how that would go. He'd deny everything, claim it was a misunderstanding, maybe even turn it around to make me look paranoid or jealous. He'd done it before with smaller things, and this was too big, too important to risk having him manipulate the narrative. I needed evidence, concrete proof that would be impossible to deny or explain away. More than that, I needed to understand exactly how he'd gained access to my research. Marcus wasn't a scientist or an engineer. He didn't have the technical knowledge to recreate my formula from scratch, which meant he'd somehow obtained my actual work. The question was how. My laptop. The realization hit me like a physical blow. 3 months ago, when I'd been preparing for a presentation to a local business group, my laptop had crashed completely. The hard drive had died without warning, taking weeks of work with it. I'd been devastated until Marcus had offered to help. He had a friend who was a computer technician, someone who specialized in data recovery from damaged drives. "Don't worry, sis," he'd said with that confident smile. "Tom can work miracles with dead computers. He'll have your stuff back in no time." I'd been so grateful, so relieved when Tom had managed to recover not just my presentation but all my research files. Marcus had delivered the repaired laptop personally, staying for dinner and entertaining everyone with stories about Tom's high-tech laboratory and the incredible lengths they'd gone to save my data. Now I realized what had really happened. Marcus hadn't just arranged for data recovery, he'd arranged for data copying. Every file, every formula, every research note I'd created had been duplicated before being returned to me. He'd spent months studying my work, understanding my process, preparing to present it as his own. The social media posts, the fake timeline, the entire GreenPack Innovations persona, had been built on stolen intellectual property. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, or an opportunistic theft. It was a calculated long-term plan to steal my life's work and present it as his own. He'd watched me struggle and sacrifice, had listened to me talk about my dreams and fears, had seen how much this project meant to me, and he'd decided to take it all for himself.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But Marcus had made one critical mistake. In his eagerness to steal my research, he'd overlooked something crucial, something that would prove definitively that the technology belonged to me. Hidden in my files, embedded in the very code of my digital documents, was evidence that would expose his fraud completely. The question wasn't whether I could prove the theft, it was whether I'd have the strength to destroy my own brother in the process. The rain had stopped by the time I left for my parents' house that evening. The drive through suburban streets felt surreal, like traveling to a different dimension where everything looked familiar but operated by different rules. I'd made this journey hundreds of times, but tonight felt different, weighted with the knowledge of what was coming. In my purse, carefully organized in a manila folder, was printout evidence that would change everything once I decided to use it. Mom met me at the door with her usual warm hug, but I felt stiff in her embrace, distracted by the sound of Marcus's laughter coming from the living room. He was already there, of course, probably having arrived early to set the stage for his big announcement. The thought of facing him across the dinner table, pretending everything was normal, made my stomach churn with anxiety and anger. "There's my brilliant daughter," Dad said as I entered the living room, rising from his recliner to give me a kiss on the cheek. "Marcus was just telling us about some exciting developments at work. Sounds like both my kids are really making their mark on the world." The pride in his voice was genuine, and it broke my heart to know that in a few hours, that pride would be replaced by disappointment and confusion. Marcus stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand, and that familiar confident smile on his face. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be, a successful entrepreneur on the verge of a major breakthrough. His clothes were carefully chosen to project success without arrogance, his posture relaxed but alert. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been fooled too. "Sarah, perfect timing," he said, crossing the room to give me a hug that felt like a betrayal. "I was just warming everyone up for the big news, but I wanted to wait until you got here. Family should hear these things together, right?" The casualness of his tone, the easy way he included me in his moment of triumph, was almost more infuriating than the theft itself. Dinner conversation flowed around topics I couldn't focus on. Mom had made her famous pot roast, the same meal she'd prepared for every family celebration since I was a child. Under normal circumstances, I would have savored both the food and the familiar comfort of being surrounded by people who loved me. Tonight, every bite tasted like cardboard. Every laugh felt forced. Every moment of normalcy felt like a lie I was complicit in maintaining. Marcus was in his element, entertaining everyone with stories about his work, dropping hints about exciting developments without revealing specifics. He had everyone's complete attention, just like he always had. Even I found myself listening despite my anger, marveling at his ability to weave a compelling narrative from pure fiction. He spoke about late nights in the laboratory, about breakthrough moments and setbacks, about the passion that drove him to keep working toward his vision of a more sustainable future. The worst part was how believable he sounded. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have been impressed by his dedication, proud of his innovation, excited about his success. Marcus had always been a gifted storyteller, able to make people believe whatever version of reality he wanted to present. Tonight he was performing the role of his lifetime, and his audience was completely captivated. "So Dad said as Mom served dessert, when do we get to hear this big announcement you've been teasing us with all evening?" Marcus grinned and set down his coffee cup, clearly relishing the moment he'd been building toward all night. This was it, the moment when he would claim credit for everything I'd created, when he would steal not just my work but the recognition and pride that should have been mine. Well, Marcus began, his voice taking on the tone of someone about to share something truly momentous. "I've been working on something special for the past couple of years, something I think could really make a difference in the world." He paused for effect, making sure he had everyone's complete attention. "I've developed a revolutionary biodegradable packaging material made from agricultural waste, and today I signed a partnership agreement with Henderson Capital to bring it to market." The silence that followed was filled with shock and excitement from my parents, but all I could hear was the rushing sound of my own blood, as the full magnitude of his betrayal became clear. Henderson Capital, he hadn't just stolen my research, he'd stolen my investors too. While I'd been sitting in that coffee shop trying to understand how my meeting had gone wrong, Marcus had been signing the deal that should have been mine, using my own work to secure the future I'd dreamed of for years. Mom dropped her fork with a clatter that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. Dad's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, his eyes widening as he processed what Marcus had just said. The air in the dining room felt thick, charged with an electricity that made my skin crawl. I watched my family's faces transform from casual dinner conversation to pure amazement, and something inside me shattered like glass hitting concrete. "Henderson Capital," Dad's voice was hushed with reverence. "Marcus, that's incredible, that's one of the biggest firms in the region." He set his cup down carefully, as if sudden movements might make this miraculous news disappear. "Tell us everything. How did this happen? When did you start working on packaging technology?" Marcus leaned back in his chair with practiced ease, every gesture calculated to project humble confidence. It's been a long journey, Dad. I've been developing this technology for over 2 years now, working nights and weekends in a rented lab space downtown. You know how passionate I've always been about environmental issues. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost doubted my own memories for a moment. 2 years, Mom breathed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Marcus, honey, why didn't you tell us what you were working on? We could have helped somehow, supported you through all those long nights. Her eyes were bright with tears of pride, and seeing her joy made my chest ache with a pain so sharp I could barely breathe. I wanted to be sure it would work before I got everyone's hopes up, Marcus replied, his voice warm with false modesty. You know how these things can go. One day you think you've made a breakthrough, the next day you discover a flaw that sends you back to square one. I didn't want to disappoint anyone if it didn't pan out. He glanced at me then, just for a second, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, exactly, but awareness. He knew I was sitting there listening to him claim credit for my life's work. Dad was shaking his head in amazement. Agricultural waste into packaging material. That's brilliant, son. Absolutely brilliant. How did you even come up with the idea? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, curious to see how Marcus would handle this particular lie. This was my story he was about to tell, my moment of inspiration twisted into his fictional narrative. Well, Marcus said, swirling his wine thoughtfully, I was visiting Jake's farm last spring. You remember Jake from high school? He was complaining about all the corn husks and wheat chaff he had to dispose of after harvest, how expensive it was to haul it all away. I started thinking about how much agricultural waste gets generated every year, all these organic materials that just get thrown away or burned. There had to be a better use for it. The story was perfect because it was partially true. Marcus had visited Jake's farm, but he'd gone with me. I was the one who'd noticed the piles of organic waste, who'd started asking questions about disposal costs and environmental impact. That conversation with Jake had been the seed that grew into my entire research project, and now Marcus was presenting it as his own inspiration, his own brilliant insight. So I started researching, he continued, reading everything I could find about biodegradable materials, organic polymers, the whole scientific foundation. It took months just to understand the basics well enough to start experimenting. Again, partially true. Marcus had done research, but only after stealing my files. He'd studied my work to understand it well enough to present it convincingly. Mom was hanging on every word, her dinner forgotten as she listened to her son describe his journey to success. It must have been so difficult, working alone all this time. All those technical challenges, the chemistry and engineering involved. I had no idea you were capable of this level of scientific work. Something cold and sharp twisted in my stomach at those words. Marcus had always struggled with science in school. He'd barely passed chemistry, had dropped out of his engineering classes in college when the math became too challenging. But here he was, accepting praise for work that had required everything I'd learned in my advanced degrees, all the knowledge I'd gained through years of study and experimentation. The breakthrough came about 6 months ago, Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone of someone reliving a triumphant moment. I'd been working on the molecular binding process for weeks, trying dozens of different combinations and ratios. Then one night, around 2 in the morning, I mixed cornstarch with wheat protein in a completely different way than I'd tried before, and suddenly everything clicked. The material had exactly the properties I'd been looking for. My hands clenched in my lap as he described my formula, my discovery, using the exact same language I'd used when I'd called him that night 6 months ago, breathless with excitement about my breakthrough. I'd been so proud, so eager to share my success with someone, that I'd explained the entire process in detail. Now those words were coming back to me through his voice, repackaged as his own achievement. Margaret Henderson herself called me last week, Marcus continued, name-dropping with casual confidence. She said they'd been looking for exactly this type of innovation, something that could really make a difference in reducing plastic waste. We had a meeting on Tuesday, and by Thursday they were ready to offer a partnership deal. Tuesday, he'd met with Henderson Capital on Tuesday, the same day I'd been preparing for my Wednesday meeting. While I'd been rehearsing my presentation and arranging my sample materials, Marcus had been across town pitching my own work to my potential investors. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. He'd somehow known about my scheduled meeting and had deliberately moved to intercept the opportunity. The financial terms are incredible, he said, unable to keep the excitement entirely out of his voice now. They're offering $2 million in initial funding, with options for additional investment as we scale production, plus they're connecting me with manufacturing partners and distribution networks. By this time next year, GreenPack products could be on shelves across the country. $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow, because I knew exactly what it meant. That money wasn't just funding for a business, it was validation of everything I'd worked toward, recognition of the value of my innovation, the key to transforming a laboratory prototype into real-world impact. And Marcus was claiming it all, sitting at our family dinner table accepting congratulations for stealing my future. Dad reached across the table to grip Marcus's shoulder. "Son, I am so proud of you. This is going to change everything, not just for our family, but for the environment, for the whole packaging industry. You're going to make a real difference in the world." The pride in his voice was so genuine, so complete, that it made my throat close up with unshed tears. "We should celebrate," Mom said, already rising from her chair. "I think we still have that bottle of champagne from your cousin's wedding. This deserves a proper toast." She bustled toward the kitchen, her movements quick with excitement, leaving the three of us sitting in a moment of charged silence. Marcus looked at me directly then, really looked at me for the first time all evening. There was something calculating in his expression, as if he was trying to read my reaction, gauge how much I suspected. "What do you think, Sarah? Pretty exciting news, right? I know you've always been interested in environmental issues too. Maybe we could collaborate on something in the future." The casualness of his tone, the way he offered to let me collaborate on my own stolen work, was so audacious that for a moment I couldn't speak. He was sitting there, basking in praise for my achievements, and suggesting I might be allowed to work with him on the technology I'd created. The sheer arrogance of it took my breath away. "It's certainly interesting," I managed my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "The technology sounds very sophisticated. I'd love to hear more about the technical details, the specific formulation you developed." It was a test, a chance to see how much he really understood about the work he was claiming as his own. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Well, the chemistry is pretty complex. Lots of molecular-level interactions that are hard to explain without getting into advanced organic chemistry. But the basic principle is using natural polymers to create cross-linked structures that maintain integrity until they encounter the right environmental conditions for biodegradation." He was reciting almost word for word from my research notes, using terminology he barely understood to sound knowledgeable. But there were gaps in his knowledge, subtle mistakes that someone who'd actually developed the process would never make. He was performing the role of an inventor rather than actually being one. "That's fascinating," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What about the activation temperature for the biodegradation process? That must have been tricky to optimize." It was a specific technical detail that wasn't in my main research files, something I'd discovered through extensive testing that wasn't documented in the materials Marcus would have had access to. For just a moment, his confidence flickered. "The activation temperature? Well, it varies depending on environmental conditions, humidity levels, that sort of thing. We're still fine-tuning some of those parameters." He was hedging, avoiding specifics because he didn't actually know the answer. Mom returned with the champagne before I could press further, her face glowing with maternal pride as she popped the cork with a celebratory burst. "A toast," she announced, filling glasses with sparkling wine, "to my brilliant son and his incredible achievement. Marcus, we always knew you were destined for great things, but this exceeds even our highest hopes for you." We raised our glasses and I forced myself to take a sip even though the champagne tasted like bitter medicine. Around me, my family celebrated Marcus's success, while I sat in silent agony, watching the person I'd trusted most in the world claim credit for everything that mattered to me. The worst part wasn't just the theft itself, but the way everyone believed him so completely, so unquestioningly. After dinner, as Mom bustled around clearing dishes and Dad peppered Marcus with questions about business plans and market strategies, I excused myself to use the bathroom. but instead of heading upstairs, I slipped into Dad's home office, a quiet sanctuary lined with bookshelves and family photos. I needed a moment alone to process everything I'd heard, to figure out how to handle the impossible situation I found myself in. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see another LinkedIn notification. Someone had endorsed Marcus for research and development and environmental science, skills that had appeared on his profile sometime in the past few hours. He was already building his false credentials, creating an online presence that supported his fraudulent claims. I opened LinkedIn and searched for GreenPack Innovations, finding a company page that must have been created very recently. The description was polished and professional, describing a mission to revolutionize packaging through innovative biodegradable solutions developed through cutting-edge agricultural waste processing. There were photos of laboratory equipment, charts showing biodegradation timelines, even a video of packaging samples dissolving in water. Everything looked legitimate because it was legitimate. The technology worked exactly as advertised because it was my technology, my formulas, my years of research and development. Marcus had essentially stolen a fully functioning company and was now presenting himself as its founder and innovator. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me quickly close my phone and pretend to be examining the family photos on Dad's desk. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he watched me standing there in the dim light. "Quite a night," he said casually, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. "I hope you're not too shocked by all this. I know it probably seems like it came out of nowhere." There was something different about his tone now, less performative than it had been at dinner. We were alone, away from the audience he'd been playing to all evening. "It is surprising," I admitted, turning to face him fully. "I had no idea you were interested in packaging technology, or that you had the scientific background to develop something this complex." I kept my voice level, but there was an edge to my words that he couldn't have missed. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, studying my face in the lamplight. "People change, Sarah, develop new interests, new capabilities. Sometimes the quiet ones surprise everyone." There was something almost mocking in his tone, as if he was daring me to challenge his story more directly. "The technology you described," I said carefully, "it sounds very similar to some research I've been following in academic journals. Have you been working with any established researchers, building on existing work?" It was another test, another opportunity for him to reveal how much he actually understood about what he was claiming to have invented. "Most real innovation happens in isolation," he replied, deflecting the question smoothly. "You can't make breakthrough discoveries if you're just following what everyone else is doing. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and pursue ideas that seem impossible to other people." The irony of his words was almost unbearable. He was talking about innovation and breakthrough discoveries, while sitting in front of the person who'd actually made those discoveries, whose instincts and persistence had created everything he was now claiming as his own. The audacity was breathtaking, but so was his apparent confidence that he could get away with it. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you something directly." He straightened slightly, his casual pose becoming more alert. "Have you ever seen any of my research? Any of the packaging projects I've been working on?" It wasn't a full confrontation, but it was close, a chance for him to come clean before this went any further. His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Sarah, are you asking if I stole your ideas?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun, because that would be a pretty serious accusation to make against your own brother. There was a warning in his tone, subtle but unmistakable. "I'm not making any accusations," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm just trying to understand the coincidence. Two people in the same family, working independently on very similar technology, both achieving breakthroughs around the same time. It seems statistically unlikely." "Great minds think alike," he said with a shrug that was too casual to be genuine. "Maybe it runs in the family, maybe we're both just brilliant in ways people haven't recognized yet." He pushed off from the doorframe and moved closer, his presence suddenly feeling intimidating in the small space. "But you know what, Sarah, I'm the one with the partnership deal. I'm the one who convinced Henderson Capital to invest. So even if we were working on similar things, I'm the one who made it happen." The mask was slipping now, revealing something uglier underneath. This wasn't just about stolen research, it was about competition, about proving himself superior, about taking something that belonged to me and claiming it as proof of his own worth. The Marcus standing in front of me wasn't the charming brother who'd grown up beside me, but someone harder, more calculating, someone who saw my success as a threat to his own identity. I should get back to Mom and Dad, I said, moving toward the door. But Marcus stepped sideways, not quite blocking my path, but making it clear that the conversation wasn't over yet. You know what I think, Sarah? His voice was still casual, but there was steel underneath now. I think you've always been a little jealous of me. Always felt like you had to compete, had to prove you were just as smart, just as capable. And now that I've actually achieved something significant, you're looking for ways to diminish it. The accusation was so perfectly reversed, so completely wrong, that it left me speechless for a moment. He was the one who'd stolen from me, who'd built his success on my work, and somehow he was positioning me as the jealous sibling trying to undermine his achievements. It was gaslighting at its finest, an attempt to make me question my own perception of reality. That's not what this is about, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I could hear how they might sound to someone who didn't know the truth. Defensive, jealous, bitter about a brother's success. Isn't it? Marcus took another step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry beyond the office walls. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having trouble accepting that your little brother might actually be more innovative than you thought. That maybe all those years you spent thinking you were the smart one, the responsible one, the one who was going to make something of herself, maybe you were wrong. Each word was precisely calculated to hurt, to undermine my confidence and make me doubt myself. This was psychological warfare disguised as sibling rivalry, an attempt to destabilize me emotionally, so I wouldn't be able to think clearly about what had happened. But understanding his tactics didn't make them less effective. Part of me, the part that had always felt overshadowed by his charisma and social success, wondered if maybe he was right. I need to go, I said, pushing past him toward the door. But his voice followed me, soft and mocking. Congratulations, by the way, he called out as I reached for the doorknob. I heard about your meeting with Henderson Capital yesterday. How did that go? The question stopped me cold, my hand frozen on the brass handle. He knew about my meeting. Somehow, he'd known about my scheduled appointment, and had used that information to steal the opportunity for himself. I turned back to face him, no longer caring about maintaining the pretense of normalcy. How did you know about that meeting? The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but Marcus just smiled that infuriating, confident smile. Word gets around in business circles, he said with a shrug, especially when someone's shopping around ideas that sound familiar. Henderson Capital called me after your meeting, asked if I knew anything about similar technology being developed locally. Turns out I knew quite a bit about it. The pieces were falling into place now, the full scope of his betrayal becoming clear. He hadn't just stolen my research, he'd been monitoring my professional activities, tracking my investor meetings, positioning himself to intercept opportunities before I could seize them. This wasn't opportunistic theft, it was systematic sabotage designed to destroy my career while building his own. You've been watching me, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Following my business activities, my investor contacts. This wasn't just about stealing my research. You've been actively working to undermine my success. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I've been protecting my interests, he said calmly. Making sure that when the time came to bring this technology to market, there wouldn't be any complications, any competing claims that might confuse investors or slow down the development process. The clinical way he described it made my skin crawl. He wasn't just admitting to theft, he was explaining it as a business strategy, a rational decision to eliminate competition by destroying his own sister's career. The brother I'd grown up with, the person I'd trusted with my dreams and fears, had been systematically working to destroy everything I'd built. You're talking about my life's work, I whispered, my voice barely audible. 3 years of research, everything I've worked towards since graduating. You're talking about it like it's just a business transaction. That's exactly what it is, Marcus replied without hesitation. Business, and in business, you do what it takes to succeed. You identified a market opportunity, developed a product to meet that need, but you failed to protect your intellectual property or move quickly enough to capitalize on your innovation. I saw the same opportunity and executed more effectively. That's not theft, Sarah, that's competition. The way he reframed everything, turning his betrayal into business acumen, and my victimization into professional failure, was masterful in its cruelty. He was rewriting the narrative in real time, transforming himself from thief to successful entrepreneur, and me from victim to naive failure. And the worst part was that, to anyone who didn't know the truth, his version might sound more convincing than mine. The drive home felt like traveling through a nightmare, where familiar streets had been rearranged into something alien and threatening. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, but I couldn't seem to relax them. Every traffic light, every turn, every mundane detail of the journey home, felt surreal after what had just happened. Marcus's words echoed in my head, like a poison that had seeped into my bloodstream, contaminating everything I thought I knew about my family, my work, my future. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone had already started buzzing with notifications, social media mentions, LinkedIn messages, even a few emails from colleagues who'd seen Marcus's announcement and wanted to congratulate me on having such an innovative brother. Each notification felt like another knife twist, another reminder of how completely he'd stolen not just my work, but the recognition that should have come with it. I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands and sat down at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen without really seeing it. The familiar surroundings of my apartment felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that while I'd been living here peacefully, working on my research, believing in the basic decency of the people closest to me, Marcus had been systematically plotting to destroy everything I'd built. The worst part wasn't even the theft itself, though that was devastating enough. It was the realization that this hadn't been a moment of weakness or opportunistic greed. This had been calculated, methodical, planned over months, with the specific intention of stealing my future while destroying my reputation. The brother I'd trusted, the family member I'd confided in, had been my enemy all along. My phone rang, and I saw my best friend Lisa's name on the screen. For a moment I considered not answering, not ready to explain what had happened or pretend that everything was normal. But isolation wouldn't solve anything, and maybe talking to someone outside my family would help me think more clearly about what to do next. Sarah, I just saw the most amazing thing on LinkedIn. Lisa's voice was bright with excitement. Your brother Marcus started some kind of packaging company, and he got investment from Henderson Capital. That's incredible. You must be so proud. I had no idea he was working on anything like that. The irony of having to hear my own stolen success, celebrated by my best friend, was almost too much to bear. Yeah, I managed it. Certainly surprising news. My voice came out flat and hollow, and Lisa immediately picked up on the lack of enthusiasm. Wait, you don't sound excited. Shouldn't you be over the moon? I mean, your family is going to be rich, and he's doing exactly the kind of environmental work you're passionate about. What's wrong? Lisa's confusion was genuine, and it highlighted just how impossible this situation was going to be to explain to anyone who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. Lisa, can I ask you something? I said, choosing my words carefully. If someone you trusted completely, someone in your family, took something that belonged to you and claimed it as their own accomplishment, what would you do? It was a hypothetical version of my actual situation, but maybe talking through it abstractly would help me figure out my next steps. That's a weird question, Lisa said, her tone becoming more serious. Are you talking about Marcus? Sarah, what's going on? You're scaring me a little bit. There was genuine concern in her voice now, the kind of worry that comes when you realize someone you care about is in real trouble. I closed my eyes and made a decision. Lisa had been my friend since college, had seen me through every major challenge and triumph of my adult life. If anyone would believe me and help me figure out what to do, it would be her. Lisa, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen and trust that I'm telling you the truth, because I don't know who else I can talk to about this. Over the next hour I told her everything. The development of my packaging technology, the investor meeting, Marcus's announcement at dinner, even the confrontation in Dad's office. Lisa listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me pour out the whole horrible story. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had been dropped. Sarah, She finally said, her voice careful and measured. "That's a really serious accusation. Are you absolutely certain that Marcus stole your work? Is there any possibility that you both independently developed similar technology?" Even Lisa, my closest friend, was struggling to believe that someone could betray family so completely. "I'm certain," I said, though I understood her skepticism. "Lisa, the technology he described is identical to mine down to the molecular level. The biodegradation timeline, the agricultural waste sources, even the manufacturing process he outlined. There's no way that's coincidental." But even as I said it, I realized how weak it sounded without concrete proof. "Okay, assuming you're right about this," Lisa said slowly, "what are you going to do? Because going up against your own brother, especially when he has investors in a company already established, that's going to be incredibly difficult. And messy, and it could destroy your family relationships permanently." She was right, and that was the trap Marcus had laid so carefully. By stealing my work and moving quickly to establish himself as the legitimate inventor, he'd put me in an impossible position. Any challenge I made would look like jealousy or desperation, especially coming after his successful announcement and investment deal. He'd positioned himself as the victim of a jealous sibling rather than the perpetrator of intellectual property theft. "But I can't just let him get away with this," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Lisa, this is my life's work. 3 years of research, everything I've worked towards since graduating. If I don't fight for it, he's going to build an entire career on my innovation while I have to start over from nothing." "I know," Lisa said softly. "I know how much this means to you, but Sarah, you need evidence. Real, concrete, undeniable proof that the technology is yours and that Marcus stole it. Without that, it's just your word against his, and he already has the upper hand in terms of public perception and business relationships." Evidence. The word triggered a memory, something I'd forgotten in the emotional chaos of the evening. When my laptop had crashed and Marcus had arranged for data recovery, I'd been paranoid about losing my work again. I'd started keeping multiple backups of everything, including cloud storage with automatic timestamps. More importantly, I'd begun using a digital forensics tool that embedded invisible metadata in all my documents, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence showing when files were created, modified, and accessed. "Lisa, I think I might have proof," I said, my heart suddenly racing with possibility. "When my laptop crashed a few months ago, I started using software that tracks every change to my research files. It creates a digital fingerprint that shows exactly when documents were created and by whom. If Marcus stole my files, there should be evidence of when they were accessed and copied." "That sounds promising," Lisa said, her voice becoming more hopeful. "Can you access those records now? See what they show?" I was already moving toward my laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as I navigated to the forensics software I'd installed. The program opened to reveal a detailed timeline of every file in my research directory. Creation dates, modification timestamps, access logs, even records of when files had been copied to external storage or sent via email. It was like having a security camera trained on my intellectual property, recording every interaction with surgical precision. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, on the exact date that Marcus had returned my repaired laptop, someone had accessed and copied every single file in my research directory. The access had happened at 11:47 p.m., long after Marcus had delivered the computer and gone home. But the forensics log showed that during that late-night session, all my research files had been copied to an external device. "He did it," I whispered, staring at the screen in a mixture of triumph and horror. "Lisa, he actually did it. The night he returned my laptop, he came back and copied everything. I have the proof right here, timestamps and everything. Can you prove it was Marcus specifically?" Lisa asked, her legal mind already working through the implications. "I mean, the evidence shows someone accessed your files, but how do you prove it was him and not some random hacker or the computer repair guy?" That was a good question, and for a moment my elation dimmed. The digital evidence proved theft, but it didn't directly implicate Marcus. I needed something that would connect him specifically to the unauthorized access. I scrolled through more of the forensics data, looking for additional clues that might tie the crime to the perpetrator. Then I found it. Buried in the metadata was something I'd forgotten about, a feature of the forensics software that captured not just access times but also device identifiers for any equipment connected during file transfers. The external device that had been used to copy my files had a unique serial number, and that number was recorded in the log along with the device name. Marcus Thompson's iPhone, I read aloud from the screen. Lisa, his phone was connected to my laptop during the file transfer. He used his own device to steal my research. It was the smoking gun I needed, evidence that directly connected Marcus to the theft and made it impossible for him to claim ignorance or coincidence. Sarah, that's incredible, Lisa said, excitement building in her voice. With that kind of evidence, you could take this to court if necessary. You could prove that Marcus stole your intellectual property and demand that he stop using your research. But even as she said it, we both knew that legal action would be a last resort, something that would destroy family relationships permanently. I need to confront him with this, I said, my mind already racing through the possibilities. Show him the evidence and give him a chance to come clean before this goes any further. Maybe if he realizes I can prove what he did, he'll do the right thing and admit the truth. Be careful, Lisa warned. If Marcus is as calculated as you've described, he's not going to just admit defeat when you show him the evidence. He'll look for ways to discredit you or the information, maybe even claim that you fabricated it somehow. You need to be prepared for him to fight back rather than confess. She was right, but I didn't have many other options. Going public with accusations against my own brother, without giving him a chance to respond, would make me look vindictive and unstable. But confronting him privately with irrefutable evidence might shock him into honesty, or at least force him to reveal more about the scope of his deception. I spent the rest of the night organizing my evidence, creating a comprehensive file that documented not just the digital forensics, but also the timeline of my research, the development of my formulas, and the correspondence with Henderson Capital that Marcus had somehow intercepted. By morning, I had built an airtight case that would be impossible for anyone to dismiss or explain away. The question now was how to use it most effectively. I could go directly to Henderson Capital, present them with proof that their new partner had stolen the technology they were investing in. I could contact a lawyer, explore options for criminal charges or civil litigation. I could even go to the media, expose Marcus publicly as a fraud and intellectual property thief. But first, I wanted to give my brother one last chance to do the right thing. Despite everything he'd done, despite the calculating cruelty of his betrayal, part of me still hoped that when faced with undeniable evidence of his crimes, he might find some shred of conscience and admit the truth. It was probably naive, but I owed it to the relationship we'd once had to try reconciliation before I destroyed him completely. I called Marcus around noon, my voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through my veins. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "Can you meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street in an hour?" The same coffee shop where I'd received the devastating rejection email from Henderson Capital, where my world had first started to crumble. "Sarah, if this is about last night, I think you're overreacting," Marcus said, his tone casual but with an underlying wariness. "I understand that it might be difficult to see your brother succeed, but there's no reason for us to let professional jealousy damage our personal relationship." The gaslighting attempt was so blatant that it almost made me laugh. Even now, with my evidence gathered and my trap prepared, he was still trying to manipulate me into questioning my own perception of reality. "It's not about jealousy, Marcus, it's about truth." 1 hour, 5th Street coffee shop. Don't make me come looking for you. I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner, away from the main flow of customers, but still public enough that Marcus wouldn't feel comfortable making threats or losing his temper completely. I ordered a coffee I didn't want, and opened my laptop, the screen displaying just enough of my evidence file to be visible without revealing everything at once. Marcus arrived exactly on time, scanning the coffee shop cautiously before spotting me in the corner. He looked different than he had the night before. Less confident, more alert to potential danger. Whatever instinct had made him successful at manipulation and deception was apparently warning him that this meeting might not go the way he expected. "Sarah," he said, sliding into the chair across from me with false casualness. "I have to say, your tone on the phone was a bit dramatic. What's so urgent that we couldn't discuss it over family dinner like normal people?" He was still trying to maintain his role as the reasonable, successful brother dealing with an irrational sibling. I found something interesting on my computer last night, I said, turning the laptop screen toward him just enough that he could see the forensic software interface. Something I think you'll want to see. I watched his face carefully as he processed what he was looking at, saw the exact moment when recognition dawned and his confident facade began to crack. The silence stretched between us like a loaded gun, both of us understanding that we'd moved beyond pretense into something much more dangerous.
Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally a kind of cold calculation that was more frightening than anger would have been. "That's very interesting software," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm impressed that you're taking such thorough security precautions with your work. Very professional of you." He was stalling, buying time to figure out how to respond to evidence he'd never anticipated. "March 15th, I said, reading directly from the log displayed on my screen. 11:47 p.m. Someone connected an iPhone registered to Marcus Thompson to my laptop and copied every file in my research directory. Would you like to explain how that happened?" Marcus's face went through a series of micro-expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Surprise, calculation, then something that looked almost like relief. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, his mask slipped completely away. "You always were thorough, Sarah," he said quietly, no longer bothering with pretense. "I honestly didn't think you'd have that level of security on a personal laptop." There was something almost admiring in his tone, as if he was genuinely impressed by my paranoia rather than ashamed of being caught stealing. "So you admit it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You actually admit that you stole my research." Part of me had still been hoping he'd find some way to explain this away, some innocent misunderstanding that would let me keep believing in the brother I'd grown up loving. "I took an opportunity that you weren't capable of capitalizing on," Marcus corrected, his voice taking on that clinical tone he'd used the night before. "Sarah, you're brilliant at the technical work, but you have no idea how to navigate the business world. You would have spent 2 more years perfecting your formula while someone else brought a competing product to market first." The casual way he dismissed my capabilities, reducing years of work to technical competence while claiming all the business acumen for himself, made my hands shake with suppressed fury. "So you decided to steal everything I'd created and present it as your own innovation. For my own good, apparently. I decided to make sure that groundbreaking technology actually made it to market instead of dying in your garage." Marcus replied without a trace of shame. "Do you have any idea how many brilliant innovations never see the light of day because their creators are too naive or too proud to work within existing systems?" His ability to reframe theft as altruism was breathtaking. In his version of events, he was the hero who'd saved my work from my own incompetence, the visionary entrepreneur who'd recognized value that I was too foolish to exploit properly. The narcissism required to construct such a narrative was almost impressive in its completeness. "Henderson Capital was my contact," I said, pulling out printed copies of my correspondence with the investment firm. "I scheduled that meeting, I sent them my initial proposal, I built that relationship over months of careful networking. How did you even know about it?" Marcus smiled, and there was genuine pride in his expression. "Your email password is still the same one you used in college, Sarah. Your birthday plus mom's maiden name. You really should update your security practices if you're going to be working with sensitive information." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just stolen my research files, he'd been monitoring my email communications, reading my correspondence with investors, tracking my professional activities like some kind of corporate spy. The scope of his surveillance was far more extensive than I'd imagined. "You've been reading my emails for months," I said, the full implications sinking in. "Every contact I made, every opportunity I pursued. You knew about it before I did anything." It explained how he'd managed to intercept the Henderson Capital opportunity so precisely, how he'd known exactly when to move to maximize his advantage while minimizing my chances of success. "Knowledge is power, Sarah," Marcus said with a shrug. "In business, information is the most valuable commodity. You were broadcasting your strategies and intentions to anyone smart enough to pay attention." He was treating my invasion of privacy like a natural business practice, as if hacking his sister's email was just another form of market research. I opened my laptop fully and turned it toward him, revealing the complete forensics timeline I'd assembled overnight. This shows every file you accessed, every document you copied, every piece of intellectual property you stole. It's time-stamped, device-verified, and legally admissible as evidence of corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely concerned as he scanned through the detailed logs. His casual confidence wavered as he realized the thoroughness of the evidence I'd compiled against him. "Sarah, what exactly are you planning to do with this information?" "That depends on what you're planning to do about Henderson Capital," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Because right now, they're investing $2 million in technology that belongs to me, technology you stole and presented as your own work." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on my laptop screen. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression, less arrogant but somehow more dangerous. "You realize that if you try to prove this publicly, it won't just destroy me, it'll destroy our entire family. Mom and Dad will never recover from learning that one of their children is a thief and the other is vindictive enough to send her own brother to prison." The threat was subtle but clear. He was positioning any action I took as an attack on our parents, making me responsible for the family damage that would result from exposing his crimes. It was emotional blackmail designed to paralyze me with guilt and prevent me from seeking justice. "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me," I said, though his words hit their intended target. The thought of destroying my parents' faith in their children, of being responsible for the kind of family scandal that would define the rest of their lives, was almost unbearable. "Sarah, we can work this out," Marcus said, leaning forward with renewed intensity. "The Henderson Capital deal is already signed, but there's no reason we can't be partners. 50-50 split of everything, equal credit for the innovation, shared control of the company direction. You get everything you wanted plus half of what I've already built." The offer was tempting, and I could see how someone less prepared might have been swayed by it. Partnership with an established company, guaranteed income, shared recognition for my work. But it was also an admission that he knew the technology was mine, and accepting his proposal would make me complicit in the original theft. "And what happens when reporters want to interview the brilliant innovators behind EcoWrap Solutions?" I asked. "When investors want to hear the story of how we developed this revolutionary technology, do we both pretend we worked together from the beginning, or do I have to watch you take credit for everything, while I nod along like a supporting character in your success story?" Marcus's pause before answering told me everything I needed to know about his vision of our partnership. In his mind, I would be the technical expert who helped implement his innovation, the behind-the-scenes worker who supported his public role as the visionary founder. Even in sharing the profits, he expected to keep the recognition and control. "The technology is yours," I continued, pulling out one more piece of evidence I'd been saving. "But so is this." I handed him a printed email, one he'd sent me 6 months ago, asking detailed questions about biodegradation rates and molecular binding processes. Questions that, I now realized, he'd used to understand my work well enough to present it convincingly to investors. "You made me your unwitting consultant," I said as he read his own words. "Every technical question you asked, every casual conversation about my research, every time you expressed interest in environmental issues, you were gathering intelligence to support your theft." Marcus set the email down carefully, his expression unreadable. "You're very thorough, Sarah, I'll give you that. But you're still missing the bigger picture. Henderson Capital isn't going to walk away from a $2 million investment because of a family dispute over intellectual property. They'll demand proof of ownership, extensive documentation, maybe even independent verification of the technology's origins." He was right, and we both knew it. Even with all my evidence, challenging an established business relationship would be difficult and expensive. Marcus had positioned himself advantageously, and unwinding his fraud would require resources and time I might not have. "But I have something you don't know about," I said quietly, pulling out the final piece of evidence I'd been holding in reserve. "Something that proves ownership beyond any possible doubt." I opened a sealed envelope and removed a set of official documents, each bearing government stamps and legal signatures. "Patent application number 1847592, I read aloud. "Filed 11 months ago for novel biodegradable packaging materials derived from agricultural waste. Inventor Sarah Matthews, status approved and granted as of last week. I watched Marcus's face as the implications sank in, saw the exact moment he realized that his entire fraud had been built on legally protected intellectual property. You patented the technology. His voice was barely a whisper, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked genuinely afraid. I filed the application the week after my breakthrough, long before my laptop crash, long before you stole my research files, I explained. The patent office has detailed documentation of the entire development process, including preliminary sketches, failed experiments, and the final successful formula. Everything is dated, verified, and legally protected. Marcus stared at the patent documents as if they were a death sentence, which in many ways they were. His entire business venture, his investment deal, his claims of innovation, all of it was built on technology that belonged to me by law. Henderson Capital wasn't just investing in stolen intellectual property, they were investing in patent infringement. Sarah, this changes things, he said finally, his voice hollow. If you have a patent, then legally, he couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't bring himself to admit the full scope of his predicament. Legally, you've committed federal intellectual property theft, I completed for him. You've defrauded investors, violated patent law, and potentially exposed Henderson Capital to massive legal liability. This isn't just sibling rivalry anymore, Marcus. This is serious criminal activity. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet around us, other customers chatting and laughing, while my world fundamentally realigned itself. Marcus sat across from me in stunned silence, finally understanding that his carefully constructed fraud was about to collapse under the weight of legal reality. What do you want? He asked simply, all pretense abandoned. I want Henderson Capital to know they're investing in my technology, I said. I want public acknowledgement that the innovation belongs to me, and I want you to face consequences for what you've done, legal and otherwise. Marcus nodded slowly, the fight finally going out of him. And our family will learn the truth, I replied. All of it, the theft, the deception, the months of planning you put into destroying my career. They deserve to know who you really are. 3 weeks later, I sat in Margaret Henderson's office signing partnership agreements for my biodegradable packaging technology. The meeting was surreal in its normalcy after everything that had happened, but the relief of finally being recognized as the true innovator behind EcoWrap Solutions was overwhelming. Marcus had been arrested 2 days after our coffee shop confrontation, charged with intellectual property theft, fraud, and corporate espionage. The evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyer had advised him to accept a plea agreement rather than risk a lengthy trial. Henderson Capital had immediately terminated their relationship with him, and begun legal proceedings to recover their initial investment. The family dinner where I explained everything to my parents was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Mom cried, Dad was furious, and both of them struggled to reconcile the son they'd raised with the criminal he'd become. But they stood by me, supported my decision to press charges, and helped me navigate the emotional aftermath of betraying and being betrayed by someone I'd loved. The technology that Marcus had tried to steal was now being developed by the company I'd always dreamed of building, with investors who recognized my innovation and partners who respected my vision. EcoWrap Solutions was mine again, legally and officially, and the patents I'd filed ensured that no one could ever steal my work again. Sometimes I still thought about Marcus, wondered if he'd ever understood the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. Not just my career or his freedom, but the trust and love that had bound our family together. He'd gambled everything on the belief that theft could be disguised as success, that fraud could substitute for genuine achievement. He'd been wrong, and we were all paying the price for his miscalculation. But as I signed the final partnership agreement, and shook hands with investors who valued my actual work rather than a stolen version of it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope for the future I was finally free to build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.